Hey, Zach here, co-host of the Passive House podcast, and I wanted to take a quick moment to let you know that we have a big online event about deep energy retrofits happening this coming Friday, December 5th. It's called Reimagine Buildings Best of Retrofit. It's 4 hours of real projects and proven strategies that you can use in your work. If you've been grappling with how to renovate existing buildings into healthy, comfortable, resilient spaces, this is the event for you. A stellar cast of speakers, continuing education credits, great networking. We are super excited about it, and I hope you can join us. For info, visit passivehouseaccelerator.com. Thanks. And with that, please enjoy this episode of the Passive House Podcast.
Very early on, the more hands-on stuff I think you can get in your education, where you realize that buildings actually do get built and are then run by people and occupied by people, and they do all kinds of crazy things. You have to incorporate some of that and use knowledge into your design when you're trying to lay things up, and especially from the maintenance perspective. The more and more advanced our mechanical systems we put in buildings become, the more complicated the maintenance on them becomes, and if they don't get maintained right, they don't run right.
Hello, and welcome to the Reimagine Edit, a special series of the Passive House podcast that shares curated insights from the conversations happening in the Reimagine Buildings Collective, our membership community where we bring together climate-conscious builders, designers, and change makers to share lessons, level up our work, and build the networks we need to thrive. In this episode 13, we'll hear from Kimberly Llewellyn, Greta Tjeltveit, Al Mitchell, Yael Santopinto, Lloyd Alter, Wolfgang Feist, Michael Ingui, and Lisa White. I'm Zack Semke, Director of Passive House Accelerator and host of the Reimagine Buildings Collective, and thanks for joining me. Let's start with this great exchange between Scott, a member of the Reimagine Buildings Collective, or a Reimaginer, as we call ourselves, and Kimberly Llewellyn. Kimberly is an expert in residence of the collective. She's co-owner of Blue Rabbit Consulting and is the president of the Phius Board of Directors, among many other distinctions. Here, Scott asks about the trades as a career path for young people.
Maybe it's a super practical question, but it might have a philosophical aspect to it too. I was just at my daughter's, the parent-teacher conferences, and on the wall they had all these professions that you can do without going to a four-year college.
Yeah.
And I noticed that some of the trades are paid quite well. And I know nationally that there's a problem just getting warm bodies on the front end of their career into the trades. And I'm wondering if you thought at all about like why that is. And is that turning around because, the promise of college is not what it used to be? I think, like
Yeah.
financially, all kinds of different reasons going on. But I guess why are young people not going into the trades?
This is something that like I've thought a lot about. And also if you look up Brian, or Brian with a Y, he's got HVAC school. He's got a lot of podcasts where he talks about this with his community. And I've talked with him about this. And it is just, I think it's a universal truth that most kids who have historically gone into trades have been like the problem students, like you can't concentrate, or, you're not testing well, any behavioral issues, send them to shop class, or, like if you can't hack it at a 4-year college, you're going to end up working in a trade. That's like fairly common actually pathway. And I think it's fairly ubiquitous that people who work with their hands are thought to be less intelligent, which is crazy, is completely false. But that is a cultural norm for us. And I do think it's changing. And it's changing because conversations like these are being had. And it's changing because I have 18 and a 19-year-old also. And there is a huge awareness in their age group about how expensive college is. And it's not just a given that you're going to, either go into or put your parents into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt in order to get a 4-year degree that you may not be able to put to any practical use. And so there's a lot more awareness on the part of the young people that does not have to be a given. When I was in high school, it was a given. I was going to for it. I didn't even question it. Now, I loved school personally, but I have friends who didn't, and that is not the default that I'm hearing, like in this generation of young people. And I think that's fantastic, because their tradespeople are actually our next environmental heroes. Like, it's really our tradespeople. It's not people who are advocates. It's not people who are doing policy. It is engineers. We do need our engineers and our architects. We need the whole team, but it's really the tradespeople who need to be described and lauded as that next generation of stewards, heroes, of our resources, of our natural resources.
I'm interested in that statement. Like, is it because there's a lot of undefined stuff where they're making decisions in the field that are going to have environmental impacts down the road? Like, you can spec a certain product, but installing it, like so much of getting it done
Yeah.
correctly is the person thinking about it correctly who's doing it. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, that is what I mean. And it's also the case that I have seen, I can't count how many plan sets, architectural, structural, mechanical plan sets that I've viewed over the years. And most of them are nonsense. Most of them have like many elements that are just not even executable. And so, and that's fine. Like, everybody makes mistakes. Everybody like starts somewhere. But when there's no dialogue when there's no feedback loop from the people who actually have to execute those designs, because they're not asked or because they don't bother to give that feedback, then the designers never learn either. The architects, the engineers, they never learn. So this is one quote that I've used before, and I just find it so apt. So if you're an architect, you probably had to read Vitruvius's 10 books of architecture. I know I'm a little Hermione Granger-ish, but I think it's a fabulous read and very easy, actually. Parts of it are technical, talking about, mortars and bricks and orientation, but part of it is also philosophical. And he starts off, I don't remember if it's the first or the second book, but he starts off saying that practice and theory, I'm going to summarize, that they are, if you're only chasing one or the other, practice being the practice of doing and building with your, building something, and theory being basically the models and the designs we create. One without the other is you're just chasing a shadow. Like, if all you have is the theory, you have no idea if it's like in any way grounded in reality. And so those are architects and engineers who don't ever go into the field, who don't ever ask, was this executable? Who are not going to their projects, 1, 2, 5 years later to see what worked and what is failing. And with the tradespeople who are executing the designs, if they're not being informed, if they're not keeping track of what worked and what didn't work, if they're not having an active dialogue with the designers who maybe like have access to models and are keeping maybe better track of progress in what we know, then they're also just chasing shadows. So that's why it's so important for us to acknowledge that it takes, just like any functional sports team, like not everybody's a quarterback, like not everybody's a tight end. Every one of us is critical on this team, and every one of us should be solicited for our feedback, to engage in this conversation so that collectively we learn. And the compensation should follow.
Next up, Damien, another reimaginer, asks expert in residence Greta Tjeltveit about career change and pathways into building certification work for folks who have a background in software, but not in architecture or engineering. Greta is a building science consultant at 4EA Building Science in Seattle and is the outgoing president of Passive House Northwest.
I'm coming from 20 years of doing GIS consulting for international development, nonprofit organizations here in Washington, D.C. And for the last couple of years, have been looking to transition out and looking at some of my other passions. So I've been, as some have called it, passive house curious or building science nerd or whatever, just learning stuff on my own time. So I'm just trying to figure out how to sort of get in there. I heard you talk about your bio on the podcast and looked into your company. And I was like, well, I don't have an architecture background. I don't have an urban planning background. I don't have, which interests me in the sense of GIS, but, or a construction engineering background. So how do I get into this building science world? The certification aspects and kind of your role really were the first, like, oh, wow, there are actually, rather than just being an independent consultant, there are companies that are doing this kind of stuff. So I was excited to learn about you and what you're doing. An extension of what you shared with Josh, what kind of specific certifications perhaps and or software skills do you see useful in your company or in the industry now and 5 years from now that might help me focus on targeting a development plan for entering the space?
Yeah, so I'll disclose my previous job. I was primarily focused on green building certifications. It was day in, day out, different certifications. My job now is limited in the capacity that I work on helping to verify projects that are being certified. So even though I am, managing our passive house, specifically Phius verification services, we have 4 projects, 2 of which are on hold, both permitting issues. One we were just awarded, so it's an early design, and then a multifamily project in construction. So it's not all that common in my day-to-day job now. So in terms of like software and those types of skills, I'm not using them frequently enough right now to be able to speak to that. But previously, at my old job, I like to joke that I had like the NASCAR stickers of certifications. It was like a HERS Rater, Energy Star Rater, like the DOE Zero Energy Ready Homes, Built Green, which is a regional certification, Phius. All of those do boil down to you're either BPI or HERS, as just sort of like baseline understanding of energy ratings. So I would say that is a great first step. That does entail having oversight from a like quality assurance provider, of which there are many. I'm happy to make recommendations for the one that I've been working with throughout my time as a leader. So it does take a bit of time to complete that certification, learning how to do energy modeling, some of the on-site testing. They come out to do like field QA. So you need some projects or access to projects to go and do some of that QA work. And from there, many other certifications are more accessible because they just sort of baseline require HERS or BPI as like a foundational building science platform, if you will. From there, it's really understanding, again, kind of to what I mentioned to Josh, like understanding your market and what people are looking for in terms of certification, or if they're maybe not looking for certification, but want to better understand like impacts of if they wanted to totally redo their envelope, new windows, maybe even like in a new HVAC system, understanding how much money they'll save. And you can do that with some of the energy modeling software that's available. So the HERS or BPI rating training is really a baseline, and it has so many other things attached to it. Like you can have people dive into like the real estate side of things, where you're modeling a home and then looking through the various energy efficiency mortgages associated with what's available, based on how much better the envelope is as compared to the original one from the upgrades you've made. A lot is available, but as I mentioned earlier, it depends on your market and what you are interested in doing with it.
In keeping with this career advice theme, let's pivot to insights from Al Mitchell, building scientist and certification manager at Phius. While at the PhiusCon conference in Milwaukee this fall, Michael Ingwe, founder of Passive House Accelerator, interviewed Al for a special episode of the collective's Reimagine Tuesdays Fireside Chat series. Here, Michael asks Al where people should start when they're diving into building science and high-performance building for the first time.
Where would you start? Like, what are your recommendations? Where would you recommend they start?
There's a lot of great knowledge that's publicly available on all of these websites, and I think what you guys have got going on with the Reimagine Buildings things as well is a great forum to share some of that. The first thing I think is to probably define people. If I were starting new and I wanted to get into the high performance building world, I would try and find some local organization where people care about high performance building, because you're going to find local mentorship and local people, and that's what motivates me to do what I do every day. Is it's about the people, in the end. So find some local people, find some mentorship, get introduced to what's going on in your area and where you're planning on working, and see if they have any recommendations first. Then I would start to look probably into any of the trainings that are offered in the passive building sphere specifically, through the various programs that are available. And then while you're working through that, I highly recommend buying old books off of eBay. As an idol of mine, Joe Steebrook, says, like, we used to have these places called libraries that were full of books, and the books contained knowledge. And I spend a lot of time on eBay buying passive solar books and super insulated home books, because we're in this weird spot now where there's so much institutional knowledge that has been compiled into these books. And there was so much innovative design thinking that happened where we're like, okay, we need more insulation. We're going to do the double stud. We're going to tape the plywood. And then we want to get some solar gains, but the windows aren't great. So we're going to build a double wall where we have double glazing, a little air space, and more double glazing. So we can have this little greenhouse thing. So we're not losing too much heat through it. And then there's a technological jump. Now we have the triple pane low E argon window that's got a reasonable solar heat gain. So even if I'm trying to do this passive solar thing, I don't have to do this design thinking workaround with this double wall. But there was some thought that went into that double wall, that if we can sort of take some of that the design thinking elements of our forefathers and pull that in with some of the modern technology, I think there's this path where that's where we can start to innovate, because we can't just rest on our laurels and say, oh, this technology we have, this ERB, this heat pump is the silver bullet that's going to fix everything, because we know it's not. Learn from books and knowledge of what other people know, and learn from people's mistakes when they're willing to share it in a mentorship scenario.
For another Reimagine Tuesdays interview in the collective, Michael caught up with Yael Santopinto, lead tower renewal architect at ERA Architects in Toronto. She oversees a team of specialists that executes complex, resilient energy retrofits on post-war apartment towers. It's incredible work. Here, Michael asks Yael, where did she start when working with a client on one of these projects?
I want to make sure we get to one important question that I like to ask, because everybody's got to start somewhere. And whether we're looking at a tower retrofit or really any project, or just a conversation with a client, where do you start? What are your first steps? What do you recommend people look at? You can take that question any way you want, because I feel like there's one piece of it, which is, how do I start the conversation with a client? The other one is, where do I start to learn and look at? Two different questions, really.
Well, I'll say this. I'll say this. I think it's a great question. Nothing in my training as an architect prepared me for my job, which is actually how to balance competing and complex requirements to make the best decisions, right? And I do think that we, through the sort of funny little practice we've built ourselves, we are at the table when clients are just saying, I don't know if I should do nothing. I don't know if I should tear my building down. I don't know if I should just replace a boiler or do something transformative. Help me make those very basic decisions. And almost every project has started with that line of questioning. Maybe I just tear it down. Maybe I do nothing. And so really crafting out, really learning how to have those very early decision-making conversations and actually helping people to understand what kind of problems they're even looking at.
Yeah.
And truly mapping out do nothing, which people often do not do. Because nothing is free, right? So those kinds of conversations and those kinds of skills to even engage people in those conversations and get them through those tough decisions, that's the thrill of the job. It's certainly not what anyone tells you architecture is about, but that's really where everything happens and everything just falls from there, right? And so I think it's very exciting. And I think on probably all of us every day are doing a micro version of that, whether it's, making the best decision on a change on a site, something is discovered, and or the sort of like early decision maker process. But I do think that being armed to not be challenged by that complexity is critical.
Next up, we hear from expert in residence Lloyd Alter, who brings up the recent news story from the UK reporting on the widespread failure of insulation renovations there. He asks Wolfgang Feist, founder of the Passive House Institute in Germany and co-developer of PHI's Passive House certification, if this could be an opportunity for Passive House, given its track record of success and durability. The question, and Dr. Feist's response, was part of Feist's appearance at a Reimagine Tuesday interview in the collective, and you'll hear host Michael Ingui share his insights near the end of the exchange.
Just this morning, The Guardian ran an article that talked about how 98% of the renovations that were done to add insulations to buildings failed. 98%. That they had humidity problems, they had freezing and condensation problems at gaps, that the entire program was a complete disaster because there was no rigor and no proper inspections and no discipline in the process. And my question to you now is this not such an opportunity for the Passive House community to sort of say, look, this is what we can do because we have the rigor and we have the discipline? Because that's the one thing I found in all of when I was in Edinburgh and then I was in Belfast and then I was in Dublin, is that the quality of the existing stock of housing there is just appalling. It makes American housing look high quality. And there's so much that has to be done, and they're just doing a really terrible job of it. So this is, I meant this to be more of a question than a statement. Is this a huge opportunity for Passive House to say, we know what to do, and you won't get 23,000 failures?
Exactly. Exactly. One of the reasons we started the Passive House Institute, because after doing the research, that was academic research, the first building, it was academic, but to bring it into practice, we have seen during the research, we have seen that a HVAC system, a heat recovery system, HRV, which was claimed to have a 90% performance in real operation. When we measured it, it came out with 55. And it's not just a small difference, it's a very huge difference. And we knew that it's possible to build it in a way that it's working. And this was why we were coming up with the whole certification process. Not because we loved to do a certification, but because we have seen that if you leave that just to the producers, they can claim almost everything. So you are completely right. And also the analysis, what are the important things? When will insulation really work? The first thing is in the communication. If you communicate all these problems with, say, 89% is not working, this is a problem by itself because it's mostly seen as this is not working. Yeah, but that's not true. We know that it is working and we can prove it. This is what the passive house community can do. All the built passive houses are proof of that insulation is working. You have to do it the proper way. And we know how it's been done in a proper way. There are mainly two issues. First one is airtightness. This is what also was a problem in the very first, say, super insulated buildings in the US. They haven't been airtight. So there had been quite some problems in these buildings. So we know it has to be airtight. That was a result which came mainly from Sweden. That was Professor Arne Elmroth who did that work. So we now know it has to be airtight, and we know how to get it airtight. And the second thing is how to avoid thermal bridging. People are not aware that in any insulation, if you have a part which isn't insulated, that the impact that has is much higher than just the part of the area that is. We know that, and we also know how to do it better. And this is what the passive house community can claim. You can come, we'll help you, we'll show you how to do it in the proper way, and the insulation will work. It will work how it's intended. We know that. If you want to have, there are publications about that. Johnston and others have published that. I can send you this paper. There's been a very extensive work being done looking into existing passive houses, showing that this is really working. And that's important. Yeah? Otherwise, if we always talk, this is what I have seen in Germany. If you always talk about it's not working, people won't even start to do what has to be done.
Again, just to echo this and just to get back into our retrofit conversation, I mean, a lot of the projects I work on are retrofits, and a lot of buildings I work on will never certify because I'm just not renovating the whole building. It doesn't need it, but I still use the passive house measures and lessons. But I would say the rigor, and thank you for putting it that way, both of you, is the most important. I have had a team, an incredible team, that's done passive in my office, and a contractor's done passive, do a non-certified house, which we just weren't doing the whole house. And they just weren't following a lot of the rigor and the steps that you do as a passive house. And I think some of the steps that we've learned from what we've been taught with passive house, they're great lessons no matter what you're doing. And it's literally just to build better and follow those steps. Use the blower door as a tool. Make sure you don't have the thermal bridges. I mean, it just some of it seems very basic, and the concept.
It is basic.
Yeah, it just and it. But I feel like it's been, in my world, it's been really, really helpful. And both on the design end and on the construction end. So, and I'm sure you see that all over Europe, because I'm assuming a lot of those buildings don't fully need to be renovated either.
Yes, of course. Of course, we see that. And this is also, that's the other way. It's not difficult to do if you just have the know-how and you have learned what is really important. And we have seen that the improvement really comes if you have, of course, to spread the word. You have to really educate people how to do it in the proper way.
Speaking of retrofits, energy performance, and resilience, let's pivot to Lisa White and her interview with Michael in the collective. Lisa is co-executive director of Phius in Chicago, and here she describes Phius's newly updated REVIVE retrofit standard and its focus on life cycle cost and passive survivability.
We have released our new retrofit program called Phius REVIVE, Phius REVIVE 2024. Al on here, if he's still on, is actually a huge part in the development of that standard. So with our standards, there's kind of two areas I want to focus on. There's how far do you go with passive measures? Like how much insulation do you put in? What, how far do you go with window performance, yada, yada. And then there's what impact does my building make on the planet? Like how much energy do I consume, emissions, whatever, that kind of total impact category. So with the enclosure category in new construction, the standards are guided based on cost optimization. So it's guided based on if I add another inch of insulation, how much money do I save operationally over time? It's kind of a sweet spot of investment. And that's what all of our new construction standards are based on. With the Revive 2024, that enclosure kind of guidance or guardrail is based on now resilience or power outage resilience. So can my building sustain a desired indoor temperature during a power outage for X amount of time? So we defined how long that was. I don't want to say the number because I'll probably get it wrong. We do summer and winter. And we figured that was a more important guiding principle for an existing building. Thank you, Carmel, 7 days. So we decided resilience and outage resilience was a better metric for guiding the enclosure with an existing building than cost optimization, especially because retrofits, they don't always pencil out in the first place. They're not always something that works out cost-wise. They're just something you do for other reasons. And it seemed more appropriate for climate resilience and adaptation. So enclosure guided by this resilience metric, and then the overall energy use for new construction per person metric guided by kind of what's rational in terms of conservation is kind of where we're at right now. Per person for residential, per square foot for non-res with some allowances and things. And then for the retrofit program, it's a whole different metric that was just crafted with this program called the ADORB cost, which is, the annual decarbonization of retrofitted buildings cost, which combines the cost of many things. There's 5 factors. The cost of the retrofit, the cost to operate the building, the cost of the carbon, so like artificial cost of the carbon to retrofit the building, the artificial cost of the carbon to operate the building, and I'm talking carbon emissions, sorry, like CO2. And then the cost of the grid upgrades required to, or the grid infrastructure upgrades required to basically bring up the electrical load in that building and support that building. So you're looking at all of those cost metrics over time. And basically, I think this is like an 80-year, again, I'm probably going to get yes, it's a life cycle cost analysis, thank you. And what we're trying to do is minimize that total cost. But what the important kind of guiding threshold right now is that your retrofitted building total cost in that metric is lower than what you're doing now, than built like business as usual. So if you didn't touch that building and looked at that cost, assuming certain maintenance updates and things over time, what would that cost be versus if you actually retrofitted the building, what does that cost? So we're really trying to ensure that we're doing more good than harm with the retrofits. And this is one of the ways to kind of put a backstop on that.
Yeah, I have to say, I find it really exciting, given that most of the work I do is retrofits, and I some of the things that we're talking about in today's conversation, I think really resonate with the conversations that people have with me. I'm approached often for new work, some of which I can't even take because I don't do that kind of work, with some of the larger work and so forth. But resiliency has got to be one of the #1 items that's coming up right now. Health, resiliency, operational. I think the word is out that if I have a larger scale rental building and I'm paying for the heat, that all of a sudden it starts to pencil out really quickly. So I think that the way you're describing these for me is great. I think it really describes kind of the benefits for them. And of course, we can dive into this forever and get into even more detail. And then with Al next week, I probably will.
And Michael did indeed get into more detail with Al Mitchell during his interview at PhiusCon. Here's what Al had to say.
So Phius has always had some kind of a retrofit program in which we were looking at, is there just a thermal bridge allowance? Maybe there's some unmitigatable foundation condition that would require you to lift the building up with a crane, put insulation down, put the building back down, something asinine that's just not gonna happen. Let's make an allowance for that in our new construction targets, but it's still a lot of investment. And especially the investment's no longer buy a site, build a new building, it's buy a whole existing building, do major work on it, and then maybe it gets kind of close. So this is where we decided how far do we need to go with the building envelope in a retrofit to benefit the whole world, the grid, the embodied carbon aspect of it, like how many different elements can we pull into this that makes sense that we're going to take an existing building that's been there for 100 years and make it good for 100 years further. So the thermal resilience became the driving set point, and that I would say essentially replaces the space conditioning targets, your heating demand, your cooling demand, your heating load, your cooling load. Those get replaced by this idea of let's make sure the building is resilient to the most extreme cold in your climate and probably the most extreme heat in your climate as well, so that you can maintain habitable conditions in there. So again, I'm not saying necessarily super comfortable, but we're going to protect the health and safety of the occupants in a week-long outage. And I think there's good precedent for this too. 2021, especially early on in February that year, we had the cold snap in Texas, where their grid went down and people were burning furniture in their house just to try and stay warm. And people were like, a bunch of people were piled into one home and pipes froze, and it was quite disastrous. I think about 1,000 people died as a result of that event. And then later that summer, we had the Pacific Heat Dome out in Seattle, Portland, and Vancouver, where it was about 116 degrees Fahrenheit dry bulb. And that's also been implicated in the death of about 1,000 people. And that's a climate that a lot of the air conditioning systems that were there, a lot of people don't have them, for starters. A lot of them were rendered inoperable from some lack of maintenance or something like that. So these are both like very real scenarios that we want to make sure we're able to respond to.
And I feel like those extremes are happening more and more.
Yes.
So and I would say, just from an architect's point of view, whose clients are coming to them, they're coming to us very often. I mean, some people are not coming to us and asking for a passive house, but I would say health and resilience are the two things that's on everyone's mind. You know, what's the healthiest home I can have, and how resilient can it be? How safe can it be?
And even looking at any of the future projections we have for climate change, we're going to see near constant cold temperature, but we're going to see a hotter average temperature overall, more potential heat waves and more potential cold snaps. And then any of that ties into any amount of inclement weather, and that's when you get the cascading effect that could result in a grid failure. So making sure that your individual home is able to withstand that, I think, is a huge selling point now, especially. So that's how far you're going to go with the building envelope, with all of your traditional passive strategies, your windows. And it brings a little bit of challenge because now we have to do dynamic modeling. So we can't just use a steady state monthly method like we would in WFI Passive or PHPP. We're actually using Energy Plus as the back end of that. So we can do an hourly model to figure out how that temperature floats within that 168-hour outage we want people to do. As well as now we have hourly electrical consumption that we can do from a normal operation perspective. And we can start to do more things with that. So we have NREL released a tool called Cambium that is a grid future looking tool, and we've run that. So I'm a big Rush fan. So I've projected all of the grid regions out to 2112.
I love that. I love that.
And when I take the outputs of the model, this is the hourly energy use of the model on the electrical grid, and I'll apply those hourly emissions factors to this. So now I'm looking at, here's my annual energy expenditure, here's my annual carbon emissions, as accurate as I can model it today. And then we're starting to look at what's the embodied carbon that goes into that retrofit. And is there a point in there where you can actually break even on your operational carbon, your embodied carbon, your cost of doing the retrofit and all? So that's this ADOR cost metric that sort of replaced what would be the source energy or your primary energy target. It stands for the annualized decarbonization of retrofitted buildings cost. My colleague Graham Wright coined the term and helped a lot or led the development of that metric. So it's essentially a life cycle cost analysis with the cost of carbon applied. So we can take all of these aspects of the building, the cost of the retrofit, the cost of the operational and embodied carbon, the cost of I'm bringing a new peak load onto the grid because I'm electrifying a heating system. What's the general societal cost for that energy transition, and distilling everything down into one unit, dollars, and then doing very complicated math addition to sum that up into one metric that we can use to optimize against. So it's a whole flip and a whole new look at like passive building from the lens of a different benefit, and I'm excited to see it go forward. Tom Bassett-Dilley, who was the keynote speaker this morning, was majorly influential in this, where he said, I've got a retrofit, I can get net zero, I can get rid of my operational carbon emissions on site, but I still want to be thermally comfortable, I still want to have a lot of the passive benefits. How far do I need to go? So he sort of prompted that question to us. And then to his credit, his team just got design certified on the first actual like Revive pilot project that's gone all the way through.
This evolution of passive building retrofits is really great. We do need help answering that question, how far do I need to go? So kudos to Al and the team. With that, I hope these snippets of our experts and residents in the collective have piqued your interest. You can dive into the full replays of these conversations, all available inside the collective. And if you're not yet a member of the collective, we'd love to have you join us. You'll get direct access to experts and peers who are on the same journey with buildings, resilience, and climate. So learn more at reimaginebuildings.com. Thank you for listening to this 13th episode of the Reimagine Edit, a production of the Passive House podcast by Passive House Accelerator. It's a privilege to share these conversations from the Reimagine Buildings Collective because every time we share what we're learning, every time we listen deeply, we move a little further along in our practice collectively and a little closer to the future we want to build. None of us is doing this alone. We're learning from one another, building together, finding our footing as we go. So thanks for being part of this ongoing experiment in reimagining buildings. And if you're not yet part of the collective and you're curious, check it out. We'd love for you to join us. With that, have a great couple of weeks. We'll be back soon with another episode of the Reimagine Edit.